The time my husband's flight landed back in Vancouver, I had already changed every lock in the house, frozen our joint accounts, and sent a single email that would dismantle the career he'd spent 15 years building. He called me 43 times from the airport. I watched each notification appear on my screen, one after another, and I felt nothing except a quiet, steady satisfaction that surprised even me. I'd switched my phone to Do Not Disturb the moment I forwarded the HR file to his company's board of directors. That was at 11,004 a.m. By 11:41, his corporate email access had been revoked. 37 minutes. That's all it took. But let me go back to the beginning, because none of this started at the airport or even with the email. It started 4 days earlier on the morning of our 15th wedding anniversary. My husband had been hinting for weeks. He told me to keep the weekend of March 14th completely free. He'd made small comments over dinner about how this anniversary was going to be different, that he'd finally planned something that showed me how much I meant to him. I believed him. After 3 years of what I privately called the slow disappearance, the way he'd stopped asking about my day, stopped laughing at my jokes, started spending more evenings in his home office with the door closed, I'd let myself hope. I woke up that Friday morning to an empty bed and a house that felt wrong before I even opened my eyes. No smell of coffee, no sound of him moving around downstairs. I checked my phone, no messages. I walked into the kitchen and found a half-drunk glass of water on the counter and the car gone from the driveway. I thought maybe he'd gone to pick up flowers or to collect something for whatever surprise he'd been planning. I made myself tea and waited. An hour passed. I texted him. 2 blue ticks. No reply. By noon, I was sitting at our kitchen island staring at the wall when my sister called. "Happy anniversary," she said. Then a pause. "Are you okay? You sound strange." I told her I was fine. I didn't know yet that I wasn't. It was our daughter who gave it away. She's 17 and she has never in her life successfully kept a secret. She posted to her Instagram story from what looked like the lobby of a hotel. Marble floors, a chandelier, the kind of understated luxury that costs more per night than most people make in a month. The caption read, "Dad treating us to a little getaway because he deserves a break. Sometimes you just need to reset, you know?" I stared at that post for a long time. She had tagged the location, the Wiccanination, Tofino, British Columbia, a 5-hour drive from Vancouver. My husband had taken our 2 children, our daughter and our 16-year-old son, to one of the most expensive resorts on the West Coast. On our anniversary, without telling me, without leaving a note, without a single word. I tried calling my son next. He's the quieter one, the one who still hugs me at the door when I come home from work. He picked up on the second ring and immediately said, "Mom, I'm sorry, Dad said you needed space. I wanted to tell you," and then I heard my husband's voice in the background saying, "Give me that," and the call ended. I sat back down at the kitchen island. I didn't cry. I was too deep inside something that felt less like sadness and more like the moment before a storm, when the air pressure drops and the birds go quiet and everything holds its breath. I went upstairs and opened my husband's desk drawer. I want to be clear about something. I was not a suspicious wife. I had never gone through his things, never checked his phone, never questioned where he was or who he was with. I had trusted him the way you trust the floor beneath your feet. Not by thinking about it, but by walking on it every day without wondering if it would hold. The desk was locked. I knew where he kept the key because we had bought that desk together in 2019 and I was the one who'd filed the paperwork in the warranty folder. I'd seen him tape the key to the underside of the center drawer during a moment he thought I wasn't watching. He had always been careless about what he assumed I noticed. Inside the bottom drawer, beneath a folder of old tax documents, I found a credit card I had never seen before. A Visa in his name only, statements going back 11 months. I sat on the floor of his office and went through them page by page. Dinners at restaurants that weren't in our neighborhood and were never mentioned. A hotel in Gastown, 3 blocks from his downtown office, booked on consecutive Thursday evenings going back to September. A jeweler on Granville Street, 2 charges, weeks apart, each one just under $2,000. I had not received any jewelry, not for my birthday in November, not for Christmas, not for the anniversary he was currently celebrating without me. There was also a name on a shared calendar invite I found printed out and tucked inside the same folder. his executive assistant. She had been with the firm for just over a year. I'd met her once at the company Christmas party. She was 28, sharp, laughed at everything he said. I'd thought nothing of it at the time because I was not the kind of woman who saw threats in other women. I was slowly beginning to understand the kind of woman who trusted too completely. I put everything back exactly as I found it. Then I went to make another cup of tea because I needed to think. My background is in compliance. I spent 8 years as a regulatory analyst at a financial services firm before I stepped back when the kids were young, and when I'd returned to work 2 years ago, I'd taken a role as a senior compliance officer at a mid-sized asset management company. I understood how institutions protect themselves. I understood what kinds of behaviors triggered mandatory investigations, and I understood, perhaps better than most, that the cleanest way to end something was not with emotion, but with documentation. My husband worked as a director at a wealth management firm, one of the larger ones in Vancouver. I knew, because he had complained about it many times over dinner, that the firm had an extremely strict code of conduct. Relationships between supervisors and direct reports were prohibited. Any use of company resources, including time, client entertainment budgets, or premises, for personal purposes was grounds for immediate termination. He had called it old-fashioned more than once. He had said, on at least 2 occasions, that the partners were paranoid. I opened my laptop. The firm's code of conduct was publicly available on their website as required by provincial securities regulation. I found what I needed on page 31. Section 7.4. Conflicts of interest and prohibited relationships. The language was unambiguous. I printed it. I then called a friend of mine, a woman I'd worked with at my previous firm who now worked in HR consulting. "I need to ask you something hypothetical," I said. "She is not someone who requires much context." She said, "Go ahead." We talked for 20 minutes. By the end of the call, I understood exactly what I was holding and exactly what it would do. I spent the afternoon building the file. I documented each credit card charge with dates and amounts. I cross-referenced the hotel bookings in Gastown with his calendar, which synced to the family iPad and which he had never thought to restrict my access to. Every Thursday evening marked as late client meeting aligned with a hotel charge within a 1-kilometer radius of his office. I photographed the statements. I wrote a clear, factual summary in plain language, not angry, not personal, just accurate. The one thing I was missing was direct evidence. The statements were suggestive but not conclusive. A good lawyer could construct alternative explanations. I needed something that removed all ambiguity. I thought about what I knew about his office building. The firm had upgraded its security system 2 years ago after a compliance audit recommended better monitoring of after-hours access. I knew this because my husband had complained about the new cameras, said they made him feel like he was being watched, which he said to me without apparent awareness of how that sentence sounded. I also knew that the building manager was a man named Gerald, who had been brought in by the building's property management company and who I had met 3 times at tenant events where my husband had dragged me along before he stopped inviting me to things. I did not call Gerald. That would have been too direct, too traceable. Instead, I called a woman I know from my compliance network, someone who does contracted security audits for commercial properties in the Lower Mainland. I told her I was trying to verify something sensitive for professional reasons and asked if she knew anyone at the property management company that handled a particular building on West Georgia. She did. She made a call. By 4 o'clock, I had received the message with a name and a phone number. I won't detail every step of what came next because some of it I prefer to keep private. What I will say is that I was able to confirm through footage I was given access to through proper channels that my husband and his assistant had been meeting in his office after hours on a regular basis. The footage was time-stamped. It was unambiguous. It showed exactly what I needed it to show. I added it to the file. That evening, I ate dinner alone at our kitchen table. I opened the bottle of wine, the good one we'd been saving for the anniversary. I drank 1 glass slowly, looking out at the water. We had a view of the inlet from our kitchen window. I had loved that view since the day we'd moved in. I thought about whether I would miss it. Then I went to my home office and drafted the email. I wrote it the way I would write a compliance report, No emotional language, no personal grievance, just facts, evidence, and direct references to the relevant sections of their own policy. I addressed it to the firm's managing partner and copied the chair of the board of directors and the head of HR. I attached the documentation. I attached the footage summary. I noted the specific policy provisions that had been violated and explained clearly that I was bringing this forward in my capacity as a private individual with direct knowledge of the violations, not as a legal representative or complainant. I wanted them to understand this was not a dispute. It was a disclosure. I set a delayed send for 9 a.m. Monday morning. The firm held its weekly executive committee meeting at 9:15. My husband had told me this himself more than once because he always came home from those Mondays in a particular mood. Then I called a family lawyer, a woman who had been recommended to me by two different people over the years, whom I had filed away in my memory the way you file away information you hope you'll never need. She answered on the second ring. I told her what I had. She said she could see me first thing Monday. I said that would be perfect. I also called my sister. I told her everything. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "What do you need me to do?" I told her I needed her to come over Monday evening. She said she'd be there. I slept well that night. I hadn't expected to. Monday morning, I watched the clock. At 9:09, the email sent. At 9:17, I received the first read receipt. By 9:24, the file had been forwarded 3 times within the firm's internal system. I knew because I had a delivery tracking tool enabled. At 9:48, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. "This is the firm's HR director. Please don't take any further action. We are addressing this immediately." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. At 10,003, I received an automated notification from our home security app, a system my husband had installed himself, linked to his office building's access badge through a third-party integration he'd set up to track his own commute times. The notification said, "Office building access revoked, 09:58 a.m. He was still in Tofino. He called me for the first time at 10:11. I watched the screen. I did not answer. By noon, he had called 29 times. His texts ranged from confused to angry to something that read less like panic and more like a man who had just realized the floor was no longer there. My daughter texted around the same time, "Mom, Dad is freaking out and saying we have to leave early. What's going on?" My son called and I let it go to voicemail and then I called him back. I kept my voice calm. I told him I couldn't explain everything right now, but that I loved him and that I would explain in person when he was home. He said, "Okay, Mom." His voice was quiet and careful in the way that told me he already understood more than I'd said. I met with my lawyer at 11,000. She reviewed everything I'd brought and was quiet for a moment before she said, "You've done half my job for me." We spent 2 hours going over the separation agreement she would begin drafting. We had a marriage contract. My parents had insisted and my husband had agreed without complaint, which I'd taken as a sign of his confidence in our marriage. The contract included a clause regarding infidelity. He had signed it. The clause was not ambiguous. My lawyer said she could have initial papers ready to serve within 48 hours. I told her to proceed. That evening, I had the locks changed. I also changed the codes on our alarm system, our garage door, and the smart lock on the back gate. I contacted our bank and placed a temporary hold on the joint checking and savings accounts, citing potential unauthorized activity, which was not inaccurate. I moved the funds from my personal accounts into a new account my lawyer had advised me to open. I also went through the house and packed my husband's things, not in anger, methodically. His clothing, his sports equipment, his collection of framed hockey memorabilia, his office files. I used good boxes and I labeled everything clearly. I stacked them in the garage. My sister arrived at 7 and sat with me in the kitchen. She did not say anything dramatic. She made tea and we talked about other things for a while, which was exactly what I needed. The kids arrived home with my husband at 9:22 p.m. I knew because the driveway camera sent an alert to my phone. I was sitting on the front steps when the car pulled in. My husband looked at me first. His face moved through several expressions in about 3 seconds. He looked like a man who had been running for days and had just run out of road. Our daughter hung back. Our son walked directly toward me and sat down on the step beside me without saying anything. I put my arm around him. "What did you do?" my husband said. His voice was controlled, but his hands weren't. "I documented what you did," I said, "and I shared it with the people who needed to see it." "You had no right," he started. "The kids can go inside," I said. I unlocked the door with my new key. "Their rooms are exactly as they left them." My daughter was crying quietly. She looked at her father and then at me, and I could see her trying to calculate something. "Mom," she said, "I didn't know what was actually. I told him you'd want to come. He said you needed rest." "I know," I said. "I believe you. Come inside." She went. My son followed. I heard my daughter's voice from inside. My sister was there, and she would handle the first hour. I knew this because we had talked about it. My husband and I stood on the front steps in the March cold for a long time. He told me I had destroyed everything. He told me I was vindictive, that I was punishing him for one mistake, that I was the reason our family was falling apart. He said all of this in a low, even voice that I recognized from arguments over the years. The voice he used when he wanted to make me feel that my feelings were disproportionate. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "The boxes are in the garage. There is a hotel on Robson that has availability tonight." I looked it up, and the papers will be served in the next 2 days. My lawyer's number is on the top box. He stared at me. I went inside and locked the door. The weeks that followed were not simple. I want to be honest about that because the version of this story where everything resolves cleanly is not the true version. My son went quiet in a way that worried me and then, slowly, began to open up in therapy. We started family sessions 3 weeks after the separation, which my lawyer had encouraged and which turned out to be one of the best decisions I made. My daughter went through a period of being angry at me before she was able to be angry at her father, which I understood even when it was hard to sit with. She came to me one evening about a month later while I was painting, something I had started doing again after 15 years away from it, and she stood in the doorway and said, "Mom, I told him you'd want to come. More than once. He said you were too stressed, that you wouldn't enjoy it." "I know," I said. I put down the brush. "None of that was your responsibility to manage." She came and sat beside me. We looked at the canvas for a while. It wasn't good painting. It didn't matter. My husband's professional situation resolved quickly and not in his favor. The firm does not comment publicly on personnel matters, but within 2 weeks his profile had been removed from their website. Several colleagues he considered close friends stopped returning his calls. The industry in Vancouver is not large. Word travels. His assistant was placed on administrative leave and resigned shortly after. She did not receive a generous exit package. I know this because my compliance contact, the same woman who had helped me at the beginning, mentioned it in passing during a professional call about something entirely unrelated. I did not ask follow-up questions. My husband's lawyer contacted mine about the marriage contract. There was not much to negotiate. The infidelity clause was clear, the documentation was thorough, and his lawyer was competent enough to recognize when a file was not winnable. The process took 4 months. I kept the house. We shared custody of the kids on a schedule that worked around their school and activities. He paid child support according to the federal guidelines. I asked for nothing beyond what was legally structured because I did not want anything beyond that. On a practical note, I reopened my RRSP contributions at maximum, took over both the joint investment account and the RSPOC for the kids, and met with a financial planner to restructure everything in my name. My salary was sufficient. It had always been sufficient. I'd simply spent years treating it as secondary. The one thing that surprised me in those months was how much of myself I recovered. I had not known how much I'd lost. My compliance work, which I had always liked but never loved, began to feel more interesting once I was no longer spending half my mental energy managing the emotional temperature of my marriage. I applied for a senior role at a larger institution in the spring and was offered the position in June. The work is harder and more meaningful. I took it. I also started running again, which I hadn't done since before my daughter was born. Not to change anything about how I looked, I want to be specific about that, but because I remembered that I had once loved the particular feeling of being outside in the early morning when Vancouver is gray and quiet and the mountains are just beginning to show. I had forgotten that I loved it. I was glad to remember. My husband called me once, about 5 months after the separation was finalized. He said he'd been thinking a lot, that he understood now what he'd lost, that he wanted to talk about whether there was any possibility. I listened to him speak for about 2 minutes. Then I said, I hope you're well, and I hope the kids see that you're doing the work. That's what matters now. And I ended the call. Our first anniversary after the divorce, the one that would have been our 16th, passed without incident. I was in Tofino that weekend, actually, which was not planned as symbolism but turned out to feel like it anyway. I went with my sister and 2 friends. We hiked the beach in the rain and ate fish and chips at a picnic table and laughed until my face hurt. The Wiccaninish is beautiful, I'll give him that. I looked at it from the outside and then walked past it toward the water. My daughter texted me that morning, "Happy not your anniversary. Is that weird to say?" I wrote back, "No, it's perfect." On the long weekend in May, I drove the kids up to Whistler for 2 nights, something I'd been quietly planning since February. We ate too much poutine and my son convinced me to try a beginner bike trail, and I was terrible at it, and we laughed about it for the rest of the trip. At breakfast on the last morning, my daughter looked up from her phone and said, "You seem different this year." I asked her what she meant. She thought about it. "Lighter," she said, "like you stopped carrying something." I just hadn't known what it weighed until I put it down. There's something nobody tells you about being the kind of person who keeps everything running quietly. The one who tracks the appointments and remembers the school forms and holds the emotional temperature of a household steady year after year. Nobody tells you that the very qualities that make you reliable can also make you invisible. That the people closest to you can mistake your steadiness for passivity, your patience for ignorance, your calm for the absence of a spine. My husband mistook all three, and I think, in the end, that was the thing that undid him most completely. Not the email, not the footage, not the policy clause on page 31. It was the fact that he had looked at me for 15 years and genuinely not seen what was there. I've thought a lot about what made it possible for me to do what I did. Not the logistics of it, but the inner part. The part where you have to decide, in a moment of real pain, whether you're going to act from your worst impulse or your clearest one. I chose clarity, not because I'm naturally calm or particularly brave, but because I understood that the only version of this that I could live with was one I could be honest about. Every step I took in the open. I documented what was real. I reported what was true. I said what I meant to the people who needed to hear it. There's a kind of integrity in that, not righteousness, just the simple decision to stay accurate even when you're angry, especially when you're angry. The intelligence piece came later, and I mean that in the practical sense. I used what I knew. My compliance background, my understanding of institutional policy, my memory of a conversation about security cameras that my husband had never imagined I was filing away. People sometimes ask me if I planned it, as if I had some elaborate scheme waiting in a drawer. I hadn't. What I had was 15 years of paying attention to things that other people assumed I'd forgotten. That's not strategy. That's just the particular kind of knowledge that comes from being present in your own life, even when someone is working hard to make you feel like you're not. And then there's the part that surprised me most, the staying power. Not the dramatic part. Anyone can act decisively in a single morning when the adrenaline is high. The harder thing was the months after, sitting with my daughter through her anger at me before she could reach her anger at him, watching my son go quiet and not trying to fix it faster than he was ready for, going back to work and building something new in a professional life I'd let narrow for years, running in the rain at 6 in the morning because I remembered I loved it and I had stopped doing things I loved for reasons I could no longer justify. That's the part that required something I hadn't known I still had, not toughness exactly, more like the quiet refusal to disappear, to keep showing up for myself the way I had always showed up for everyone else. What happened to my husband was a consequence of his own choices. I didn't manufacture the evidence. I didn't invent the policy. I didn't place him in that office on those Thursday evenings. I simply stopped pretending I hadn't seen what I'd seen. And in the space that opened up when I stopped managing his reality for him, I found that mine was still there, intact, waiting. My daughter said I seemed lighter. She was right. I had put something down. I just hadn't known how long I'd been carrying it.